There's the Endangered Species Act. I think came from the Nixon administration, or way before my time. But the Endangered Species Act is what basically directs the Endangered Species List. We're sitting in the grizzly bear recovery area for the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is the grizzly bear in the lower 48. All grizzly bears in the lower 48 are on the Endangered Species List. Numbers were really, really low at the time. There was pretty open hunting in a lot of states that had grizzly bears. Not for any other reason. I think we just didn't understand wildlife as well as we do now, and the effects that open harvest can have on certain populations, where it's really hard to get them back to sustainable levels. Prior to the Endangered Species List and grizzly bears being listed, there's some pretty cool books and stories of people bear hunting in this country with using horses as bait, carcasses. And in a lot of states, black bear and grizzly bear, you didn't buy a license, you just could kill one, or you got a bear tag with your elk tag. And so I think it really was tough on grizzly bear numbers. So they ended up on the Endangered Species List, and they've been on there ever since. How that works is, the federal government is able to dictate through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service the regulation of the animals on the list. And so they have mandates, and they have a goal for recovery. That goal and those mandates and the criteria for recovery basically are put onto the states to try and attain. And so when you look at the success story of the grizzly bear in the Rockies, specifically in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, and where we're at now with numbers, the federal government didn't do that. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had very little part in it, other than it was their rule. The state governments have brought back, the states have brought back the grizzly bear, and the people on the ground working for the state agencies have done most of the work in this, and so much so that the states are footing the bill primarily for grizzly recovery. So that means that your tax dollars and mine are being used to recover a species, and then now manage a species that is recovered without the states being able to have control of it. To be a recovered species, the grizzly bear had to meet several recovery criterion that was set forth a long time ago. And it's been well over 10 years, more than that those recovery criterion have been met. And so not that long ago, the grizzly bear was delisted in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I think they got delisted. They were delisted for, I don't even know if it was a half a year or whatever, but part of that delisting process was the states all had to have their own management plan, and it had to be approved. And in part of those management plans was hunting. So if the grizzly bear got delisted, there could be hunting, because the states now control the species, and the states can do what they want. But most states, Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, were super conservative, and they had a memorandum of understanding that they were only going to kill a small population of grizzly bears in the recovery area through hunting. And we can get into all that different stuff. But essentially what happened was a judge got a hold of it, and several groups petitioned a judge to stop the hunt, or put the hunt on hold while they worked on their plan to basically relist the grizzly bear. So shortly before the hunt was supposed to start in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, the judge in Missoula, Montana, put the hunt on hold. People had already drawn tags, everything was in place, and the hunt was stopped, and they went to court, and he deemed that the bears weren't recovered based on genetic diversity and a few other things, and they were relisted. So we've had a short amount of time where the grizzly bear was delisted in the lower 48, in the GYE, I call it, greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And right now we're fighting through similar issues. It just seems like wildlife should not be managed through courts, and that's where we're at with the grizzly bear. It's a very polarizing species. Those of us that live in grizzly bear country and recreate in it see how many there are. They're not endangered by any stretch. I'd say we probably saw 5 or 6 different grizzly tracks on this trail walking in this small tiny drainage, and this is just a small piece of it. And so one thing that'll probably be good to talk about is how they break apart the grizzly bear populations, because they're managed differently. So the grizzly bears in the lower 48 have population segments. So the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is a population of grizzly bears that they manage. The northern continental divide ecosystem is a population of grizzly bears that they manage. And that's up in Glacier, northern Montana. There's the Selkirks, the Cabinet Yaak, there's the Cascades. So there's different population segments of grizzly bears, and they all have their own criteria for recovery. So part of the issue that we had was several of the groups wanted to see genetic diversity and wanted to see essentially land bridges so the different populations could intermingle and breed. That's a really challenging thing. We see it. Grizzly bears in this area, which we're in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, have migrated, and they are moving far north, all the way up into Helena, Butte area, and you have bears from the northern continental divide ecosystem in northern Montana moving way south. There was probably going to be some natural genetic diversity happen and bears breeding from different population segments over time. It would never be able to see grizzly bears from the Yellowstone area breed with grizzly bears in the Bitterroot. It's just, we live in the landscape. There's too many hindrances for them to make that migration or make that movement. So that was the thing I think they used to stop it all. And knowing that it would be impossible to create those things, they thought, well, this is our way to stop delisting for good. But what the judge had said was, if you can show that we have genetic diversity and you can do some different things like translocate bears from Glacier National Park to Yellowstone or those areas, right, from 2 different population segments, then you would meet the new recovery criteria that they made. So that was done. There was a petition by at least Wyoming to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to delist again recently, and it sat for a couple years and they never gave a ruling. And then most recently, right before the Biden administration ended, they gave a ruling on it, said, no longer, not only will you not delist, we're going to make it bigger, the recovery area. We want grizzly bears pretty much in all of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, which is an impossibility. When that was passed, it basically said, you know, us as folks that have been trying to work on the delisting, we just kind of looked at it as like, well, that's a way that they'll never be delisted. Trump admin came in and they put that on hold. So, you know, right now we're in this limbo situation with grizzly bears that, you know, it just doesn't look great. It's a tough thing. You know, when you do what you're told to do, and the states did it, and guys spent their entire career, there's biologists I know that spent their entire career trying to recover the grizzly bear, and to do such a great job and realize such an incredible success, to just kick the can down the road because a bunch of people don't want to see the grizzly bear delisted. The bears are so prolific in this area, in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We have so many in the recovery area that the bucket is essentially full, and they're pushing out into the areas that are not deemed grizzly habitat or suitable habitat. And essentially areas like that, they're not counted. They don't want them. So we have so many living in those areas now that it's a challenge. I mean, it's a conflict issue. We have tons of bear problems all year long in all 3 states. Lots of grizzly bear issues. We're paying people to manage grizzly bears and basically move them from one place to another. Or we're paying out damage for crops and livestock because grizzly bears just come in to tear up chickens and kill cows and do a lot of things that, you know, the state's paying the farmers and ranchers for. So it's really there's not a lot of people outside of the West that even know this is a thing. You know, but when you live in this area, I mean, everyone knows about it, and everyone's frustrated. I think the biggest thing that we would like to see is let the states manage it. They know better how to manage the resource than anyone. They're the ones that recovered it. Why not let them manage it? And for me, like, I want to see sustainable grizzly bear populations because I want hunting opportunities. You know, like I haven't talked to many people that want to eradicate the grizzly bear. I talked to a lot of people that are like, man, if we could get them delisted, then we could hunt them. The hunting numbers were so low if they were going to have a hunting season. the harvest was so low it was going to be almost negligible. And part of the management plans for the states is they had to manage to a certain level of bears. And so you would never be able to see the numbers drop below this level or they would be listed again. So there were some incredible safeguards in place to make sure that the grizzly bear wouldn't have got to levels it was in the 70s. It seems game to me, the system, you know, when you can just file a suit in court and shut so many things down, it's not the way wildlife should be managed. So yeah, the grizzly bear issue is a major one out here. A big part of why we started the American Bear Foundation was because of that, like to try and get the grizzly bear delisted and do what we could do. And there's a lot of groups out there fighting to try and get it delisted, and most of us just want to see state level management. We're not looking for eradication of a species, you know, but you do get frustrated. You know, you have times where it seems like you can't go have fun in the hills anymore without having grizzly bear problems, at least in this area. And I know it's not much different in several areas around these population segments where there's grizzly bears. You know, it's almost like you risk more by not doing anything than you do by doing something. We are now sitting at a point where it's like they've actually shown there's just so many bears in some areas, like the reproductive rates are declining. Like Mother Nature's starting to take effect and say like, dude, there's just too many. They can't live on time. And you look at this country, like there's nothing to eat in half of it. And so our bears are aggressive. They're fighting for their lives, and they don't fear humans. And that's the case in the lower 48. You know, you go up to Alaska and most of those bears are terrified of people, or they don't bother them. And you come down here and it's a different circumstance. But we've allowed it. We've fostered that. Basically habituated bears to humans by not doing anything about it. Yeah, I think like the biggest thing that, like, I always hear people say like, oh, if we hunted them, they'd be afraid of people. That would take generations because it's learned behavior. Mom teaches the babies. And until you start really leaning into it, you're not gonna change bear behavior overnight because you hunt them. But what you can do, and one of the biggest factors in species health and management is public acceptance, public perception, and social acceptance. Because if you think about it this way, like you look at some of the populations of species that they've documented, you know, we almost had no buffalo left. And elk numbers are super low and deer numbers are super low. You know how to ensure a species is never going to go extinct or become so few that there's no hunting opportunity is create hunter advocates for that species. Think how great it would be for the grizzly bear, and not only social acceptance, public acceptance, but just in their future if you had hunter advocates for the grizzly bear. Look at what all these hunter advocacy groups have done for species, mule deer, elk, turkey. You know, there's groups out there and hunters out there that are so passionate about a species that they're going to make sure that it never declines to numbers that are unhealthy. If you created a group of people, and you would do it instantly by creating some small hunting seasons, you would instantly create hunter advocates for the grizzly bear. And that's the one thing that the grizzly bear doesn't have right now. They have no social acceptance in the areas that they're prolific. People don't want to deal with them. They're tired of them. Hunters and sportsmen are tired of them. And that's really tough for a species. But you can change that overnight. You cannot change bear behavior overnight, but you can change that. And so if you got a bunch of people that are passionate about grizzly bears and they want to hunt them one day, they're going to make sure they're not getting in trouble and doing bad things and being reduced to numbers that are going to put them back on the endangered species list. So I've always thought like that's a good first step right away to affect some change and affect the attitudes towards grizzly bears, because it's really bad. I mean, the attitude towards grizzly bears is really bad right now. I used to enjoy seeing them. I've seen so many now that I don't even, it used to be a neat thing. It's like seeing cow elk to me. That's where I live though. You know, that's what we're dealing with. It's not that way everywhere. But if we keep going down the path we are, you're going to be talking about it in your neck of the woods too, if you're not already. I always tell people like, don't just go through life with blinders on when it comes to this stuff. There's constantly things that can be done, and just stay involved with it, understand it, read about it, pay attention to what's going on with the feds and the state governments with grizzly bears. There's tons of information out there. And yeah, just kind of follow it. We're always putting stuff out with the foundation on it, you know, updates. You know, we get some pretty good updates before anything really goes public on the rulings and that. And so just stay involved as much as you can. I mean, that's about all you can do right now. The grizzly bear and the endangered species list hopefully is not something that goes on forever, but right now it's pretty hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel.